Given the nature of nerd culture, there are many, many things you can do to antagonize the audience of a superhero property. The obvious one is having characters that don't match up with the source material they're from. For example, Zack Snyder's Man of Steel is so busy being a Jesus metaphor that it forgets the young man from Kansas that was Superman's origin. You could also create a romantic side plot that is very painful to watch. Another point for Man of Steel. Or you could kill off a major villain in a character's franchise, like in, I'm starting to notice a pattern. But today, with one of my own characters, I'm going to be talking about a character that falls under a different category of infuriating. Being kind of overpowered at full strength, but having a stupid reason not to use that power. But when you rise from the grave 400 years after your death and are granted the power to become an untouchable ghost whenever things get overwhelming, it's not difficult to imagine why she's not using her power, her true power, to the fullest. Hey everyone, I'm Viva Verbatim, and if you couldn't guess from the intro, we're going to be talking about another one of my over 700 characters in my mental Rolodex. She's definitely not my favorite, but she does have connections to my favorite sad skeleton boys, Mr. Bones, Master Death, and Abelos. Clara has been brought up before, check out my Grim Reaper character retrospective if you're interested, but I wasn't really satisfied with her design or her past story, so like my other first characters, she gets a whole video to herself so I can fix this mess in the time that it takes to write the rough draft of this script. This character took 3 designs before she started to come together, and while I'm not happy with everything about her current design, I'm definitely happier than I was before. Progress is important, dear viewers, and since this intro is currently stalling that progress, let's go ahead and talk about our character for today. Clara Barton, or Seraphina. Clara Barton is certainly a product of my 8-year-old self. Back in 4th grade, I was learning a new $5 word every week in class. Words like cantankerous, abscond, gregarious, and, my favorite, base. Around that time, I was obsessed with the paranormal and with the power of my pretentiousness and the corpse bride combined. The first iteration of the half-ghost girl was born. Unlike the other characters, her name wasn't something stupid or predictable like Animal Girl or American Eagle or The Shadow. It was luminous, like the word meaning bright, which I realize in hindsight doesn't make a lot of sense, but 8-year-old flex, I guess. Anyway, Luminous was pretty much just the character in a dress that I would partially erase after drawing her to get that weird ghost effect. Because she would always be the 4th or 5th character I drew in the group, and she wasn't the most interesting character idea, she's the character that was overlooked the most and has been very stagnant as a result. Even in my freshman year of high school, when I started to write her into scripts, the gist of her character was the same. It's through the creation of characters around her that added intrigue to her boring existence. When I was 12, I drew Mr. Bones for the first time, and with a character that collects souls and takes them to a giant vault, that opened up an entire world of possibilities for half-ghosts and wayward spirits. Hence, Clara now had a friend in the afterlife and future stories to tell outside of her team. Next, rearing back a little bit to when I was about 9 or 10, I created Tesla, an android that infiltrated the team. She was kind of just a Swiss Army knife for the heroes until 8th grade. I was just screwing around, but I thought that a droid and a ghost couple would be kind of cute, so I paired Tesla and Clara together. I didn't realize then how much that would shape Tesla and Clara's storylines, nor did I realize how similar a ghost with no living body and a droid with no living soul could be. And rearing back even further to 2013 again, I had 26 characters lined up to become the future main antagonist's child experiments, who are also major players in Clara's story, though in a more complicated sense. Clara is inspired by popular depictions of bridal ghosts. Bridal ghosts are what I consider a subcategory of female spirits, kind of like, I guess, female yurei kind of stuff, like grudge type Japanese ghosts. I guess it's a kind of similar Americanized version. There's characters like La Llorona, but from my childhood, I was always scared of this one weeping ghost in a wedding dress that would appear in cars, crossing over a bridge in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. Clara's been a character connected with heartbreak ever since I created her, so I assume bridal ghosts who are known to have died on their supposed happiest days were my inspiration back then. Clara's 386 years old at the start of the series and ends the series at age 400. Not that it makes a difference when she looks 20 forever. She's 5 foot and she's our first non-human character, being the only half-ghost of the team. She's mixed, half black and half white, with noble blood on her father's side and the African blood of her former slave mother. Her mother had no other children after her since she died of some kind of mysterious disease. As for fun facts, we've got 2 today. Clara has a British accent that she slips into from time to time. Mr. Bones has no accent, and with him as her only company for quite some time in her story, she developed a flatter, more Americanized speech pattern. But she does occasionally slip back when she's frustrated or terrified, which is honestly often in the first few seasons. Second fun fact, her name was randomly chosen, but she shares a name with Clara Barton, the creator of the Red Cross and the Angel of the Battlefield. You'll see in a bit how that shaped her current story. She was born on November 1st, 1657. She's a cisgender female, and her sexuality is ambiguous because I can't settle on anything anymore. Though she did have a previous male suitor. Her religion isn't particularly important. But given her knowledge of the existence of purgatory and the time period she was born in, I think she'd have a Catholic-based religious view. She can speak English and French, but she can also write in basic German and Latin, so she and Becky Adams, a World War II soldier, sometimes have short conversations in German just to mess with the team. Just to get this out of the way, we've got to understand where exactly Clara gets her powers from. And boy is it convoluted. Clara is one of 2 characters on her team whose power is derived from death. It has to do with our first example of an unstable paradox in this universe. Here's the timeline for you. In an alternate timeline from the main one, an immortal child Master Time tested his abilities by sending 2 random test subjects back to the 1670s, where Clara was set to be wed. He had predicted many deaths at her hand, in hopes that they would find a way to either kill her or bring her back to the present to capture. The same time travel debacle did happen in the main timeline, but the circumstances were very different, most notably because of what the 2 randos decided to do. They both wanted to take Clara back to the future to be their wife. She's pretty and wealthy, so it made sense, but they couldn't agree who would take her. The 2 argued until one made a desperate attempt to kidnap Clara by soaking her wedding dress in a chemical that would knock her out for his claim, but the substance the man used was formaldehyde, and you can imagine how well that would go. The second Clara's body hit the dance floor, the man had created an anomaly of an event that ricocheted across timelines to create fractures and paradoxes. The decisions of the Reaper of Death, Mr. Bones, and the matter of dealing with her fluke death was one that frayed the timeline into hundreds of different variations. For the sake of simplicity, we'll stick to the main timeline. In this version of events, Mr. Bones, Master Death, and the Foreman, the Trinity of Death, decide to rebond her soul to her body nearly 400 years in the future, since in the time that it took to come to their decision, 400 years had passed in the mortal realm. In order to rebind a soul to a completely decomposed body, Clara was imbued with the power of the Foreman, the leader of the Trinity of Death. The Foreman is my universe's personification of the Death Realm, so that means that Clara's soul was imbued with the power of death itself. Clara's powers, as a result, are more on the mystical side, like Azaba Black's, than Midnight Sparrow's psychological or even the Aussie Devil's intellectual-based gifts. Her body, having rotted away centuries before she was brought back, was stitched together into a skeleton and ectoplasm skin, and the torn robes of the Trinity of the Dead, coming alive to become her heart, blood, and organs. Again, there's no science here, and it's all kind of metaphoric, but she has the same powers of all half-ghosts in this world. She can shift between a normal and ghost form. She can become invisible. She's immortal as a ghost, and she heals quickly in her human form. She can possess people, though she's not entirely comfortable with it, and she can make objects move like a poltergeist. With these basic powers comes a second series of abilities unique to her as a being made of the fabric of the Death Realm. She doesn't have access to them until the final season, but her powers include the following, and since they're not entirely important here, the specific of these powers of death will be saved for another video. I just think it really wouldn't be fun if a hero had access to these powers. That's why I would wait until she was a villain before I would let her use any of her godlike abilities. Makes for better storytelling intention, I think. As for little quirks in the context of the show, Clara is an animal lover and is especially affectionate towards cats. Cats are the only species that can see her when she becomes invisible, since they have an unexplainable innate connection to the dead. She actually finds a stray cat that she names Muna, and usually when the cat's in her hands, she's a little bit more sure of herself because she's calmed by it. The cat becomes like a sort of mascot for the team. She has a librarian personality, not because she's an intellectual, but because she likes coffee on rainy days and cozy sweaters. She's always cold, even when everyone around her insists that it's warm, which explains the sweaters. When she claps her hands or walks or makes any sort of movement with her body, it's a much more muted sound, almost non-existent, because her body isn't technically real. In instances where she enters her ghost form, she'd become an unsaturated version of her regular design. However, her uniform, which is specifically designed to stay on her in her ghost form, doesn't become unsaturated at all. If I had it my way, the swirls of her hair would constantly be spiraling, kind of like the billowing of smoke in Mulan, just to give her hair a ghostly, constantly moving effect. Though I do recognize that a model that complex would probably be an irritating touch for someone to actually try to animate. Lastly, her veil and appearance are somewhat designed based on a butterfly, specifically the kinds with wing patterns meant to mimic larger animals, hence the eyes. And the fact that whenever the veil behind her hangs open, she usually tries to look a little bit more intimidating. Though not necessarily in this drawing, because I wanted to at least showcase her optimism a little bit. Her relationship with all three Guardians of Death are very different, but she holds all of them in high regard. The foreman, their leader, is very close to her. Because her soul is imbued with theirs, the two understand each other in a very intimate sense and are both comfortable just being in silence together. Because she and Mr. Bones, my suave Grim Reaper, both have a background in music, they play together quite often, and both appreciate the simplicity of a glass of wine and a symphony performance every now and again. They both have a sort of older brother, younger sister relationship with each other. And Master Death is kind of like a baby brother, since they're very naive and look for affection from both Mr. Bones and Clara. Mr. Bones gives Clara advice when she needs a death coach. Get it? Like a life coach, but never mind. They just generally act as a sort of familial guardian system to her, teaching her to appreciate the more taboo, bleaker things in life. Azaba is Clara's best friend in the living world, almost as much family to Clara as the Trinity themselves. Azaba isn't subtle when she gives advice, which helps Clara through hard times. Azaba is kind of a breath of fresh air for her after being dead for years and spending most of her previous life as a submissive housewife type. I will neither confirm nor deny if the two have a closer relationship, mostly because I haven't confirmed or denied it with myself. Avery is a sturdier friend to Clara than Azaba. She's a little bit more predictable to her, seeing as she's less intense. Avery indulges Clara's curiosities about the world around them, seeing as she's the most up to speed on tech advancements, medical science, and is well read enough on everything else to be a valuable figure. Avery's also a people person, so she's great at encouraging Clara when she needs it the most in difficult situations. Tesla is also close to Clara, but a little less so since they were friends for a shorter time. As of rewriting the story, Tesla is no longer Clara's girlfriend, but is more like a child figure to Clara's motherly persona. Clara teaches Tesla, an android, what it's like to live and die, and Tesla in turn learns to appreciate her own version of sentience and teaches other droids to appreciate theirs. Clara's relationship with Tesla is very maternal, so when Tesla's gone, it's like Clara lost a child instead of a lover, which I think is more fitting for her character. U and X were both some of Max Astral's child experiments. If anyone had a similar child-to-mother relationship to Clara like Tesla, it would be U and X. Clara took care of them for an episode and even in later seasons, developing a very sincere desire to protect them and the other experiments. She cherished every time they stood up to Max in the story and supported them until the day they died. Muna was Clara's cat, and later, once she had taken a human form, Clara's friend. However, Muna and Clara had a tense relationship before and after Muna changed because Muna is kind of the opposite of Clara. She has little empathy at first, she's snarky, and she doesn't have the same gentle spirit as Clara. They're still good friends because Clara took care of Muna as a cat for so long, but they're not as close as some of the others are. Explanatory, I hope at least. Clara never knew her father because she was too young, and she barely knew her mother because she died early in her life. However, her mother did instill a hatred of her father and his greed into her early on, and her mother fostered her love of reading that carried on into Clara's adulthood. Clara Barton was the daughter of Lady Clarice Barton in a feudalistic 1600s England. Her mother was a writer and a socialite after influencing the right influencers and marrying the right man, Leonard Barton, the richest man in the country at the time. Clara was the daughter of a hero and villain duo that would never be historically documented. Leonard Barton being the Frost King, a man who had earned respect and fortune through deceit, rather than through wit, charm, and intellect as her mother had. He was ultimately murdered by his heroic bride, who went by the alias Seraphina. Clarice Barton's name would be erased from history once her wealthy husband was dead. She spent the remaining years of her life writing books about the duology of good and evil, basically creating the first library of hero-villain philosophies before succumbing to yellow fever, when Claire was only 10 years old. She died alone with hundreds of books that would never be sold, but she saved a small fortune for her daughters so that Clara could marry and live life in comfort once she was gone. Clara spent the last 8 years of her life in a prearranged marriage with a well-off Scotsman before succumbing to exhaustion on her wedding night and being pronounced dead. However, her death was an error in the grand scheme of the universe, so she was granted a second chance at life by the Trinity of the Dead. Time passes differently in the Death Realm, and while she spent maybe a few years amongst the dead to prove herself and have everything sorted out, over 300 years passed, and her decomposed body was in need of repair. It had to be reformed over time, with her rendered temporarily unconscious during most of the process. By the time she wakes up in a hospital at the start of Season 1, her body has been studied in Chicago by many, including Avery Atwell, one of her future team members. Clara wakes up in a hospital room with Azabeth Black and Avery Atwell. After months of being in a coma, she has a new half-ghost body that is relatively stable. That doesn't stop Avery and Azabeth from asking her questions, and Clara questioning right back. Being big-hearted despite her poor condition, Clara agrees to join Cassidy Joyce's team as a sort of cheerleader and supportive friend on the sidelines. Azabeth Black joins partially to keep an eye on her and partially because of her pride, since a girl that can barely walk agreeing to do dangerous shit when she isn't doing the same thing is basically admitting that she's weaker than Clara. The two become close friends over the course of the first season, as Clara gradually finds herself on the battlefield more and more frequently in order to protect Azabeth in any way she can. Everything is still new to her, and seeing as she's in a future no one even imagined back in her time, she finds herself deathly afraid of things she can't understand or reason with, and her ability to enter a full ghost state certainly doesn't help her not chicken out during conflicts. She spends the season getting over her fears with Azabeth's guidance while also demonstrating her own strength as a kind face, with the capability of returning villains to the side of good. Stories of her mercy on the battlefield caused many of Max Astral's child experiments to turn against him at the end of Season 1. She truly lives up to her angelic hero name across all her significant appearances, including in Hunted, where she's forced to confront a villain that's stalking and threatening her, Caretaker, where she looks after 2 sick villains, and in Cat Got Your Tongue, where she and Azabeth have a falling out about Azabeth's need to keep all her secrets close to her chest. Keep in mind that during the season, Clara also meets Tesla, a traitor that disguised herself as one of Clara's teammates. The two reconcile and become friends towards the end of the season. Also, 6 of Max Astral's defecting experiments go into hiding but plan to seek her out in future seasons. In this season, Clara is meant to be a supporting background character in almost every respect, but she is helpful in one major way: diplomacy. During Season 2, the team joins forces with another hero team in order to conquer a rival team of villains. The team in question is called the 9 Muses, and they have each preserved a different element of earthly art or expression for centuries. The problem is that they're aliens, and while they revel in fine culture and spoken word of the past, they're very distant from the people they claim to be watching over. Clara, being a lover of the arts and a bit of an outsider herself, appeals to their interests and struggles in order to create a stronger bond for her team. She especially grows close to the young demon muse of music, because he's very timid like her, and as an exorcised demon, he almost acts like a ghost himself. When he's framed for murder later in the season, Clara sides with those accusing him at first, but because of her friendship with him, she ends up turning the tide and convincing her hardened teammates that he doesn't have the heart to kill. She basically turns the tide in the favor of truth in the 2-parter finale, just as she did in Season 1. Clara also serves to move the long-term plot forward in a few ways, and here's a quick rundown of her most significant episode. Remember Us is a pre-Season 2 episode where the team's financial backer pulls Clara, Tesla, Romeo Starling, and another team member aside and shows them a piece of their future. Clara sees herself wearing her father's mask, and though it's not shown what Tesla sees, she becomes worried for Clara after this point. The Search for Cyanocida is a Romeo Starling-centric episode, but in conjunction with Romeo's A-plot of creating a spin-off series, Clara is seeking out her own allies. Dee was one of Max Astral's former child experiments that went AWOL, but Clara believes that she may be a half-ghost that protected her and her team from a deadly threat in the past. Her hunch proves correct, and Dee proves to be vital in their efforts to defeat the threat of the season. Breadcrumbs is an episode where Clara and the 9 Muses work together after learning that there may be a traitor among them, with Clara becoming unwillingly suspicious of the Muse of Music. Clara is very story-relevant as a figure that sews all the pieces of the plot together, but the seeds of her downfall are sown in Season 3. Clara Barton is another team member that goes into space alongside Romeo Starling and Avery Atwell. She, however, gets stranded with the people that stowed away on their ship because they were searching for her. The 6 child experiment defectors I mentioned earlier finally caught up with Clara after being irrelevant to the plot for a whole season. Simply going by the letters E, A, S, R, X, and O, they crash land with Clara on Norcasia, a planet that's like an alien United States with loud but optimistic people and shady stuff under the surface. Clara isn't mad at them or anything. Actually, she appreciates their company because she still thinks highly of them for breaking free from Max's control, just as they still think highly of her. They're stranded for maybe a week or so, being the last missing passengers of the original ship to be rescued after the others have already been reunited. In that short time, they become a little family unit exploring the planet together and doing minor heroics by hauling away goons, stepping in to protect average citizens. It's when they finally find their way to the intergalactic market that things take a turn for the worse. The intergalactic market is a seemingly bustling, cheerful series of thousands of traders and stalls, but its underbelly is home to the largest organized alien trafficking ring in the entire universe. Clara and her new companions happen to stumble right into its operations, and Clara can't take it. Seeing so many creatures she can't save or protect being sent off into slavery, in a system that she can't destroy, leaves her devastated. In an act of mercy, she destroys every caged creature she finds so that their souls can be free, and with a bit of coaxing from her new, misguided friends, proceeds to kill every perpetrator of the vicious cycle of torture and unrest that she can find. In the midst of it, she gets a message from her close friend Tesla back on Earth that is quickly cut off when Tesla is destroyed. It's that last bit of news that completely puts her over the edge. When her team finally finds her and a tracker on her person, she leaves it behind and disappears with her fellow defectors, leaving her life of heroics behind. News of Clara Barton's whereabouts over the next 13 years are muddy and difficult for her closest friend Azabeth Black to follow. She had taken several return trips to Norcasia looking for Clara, but she never turned up again. However, terrible news of a ruthless Snow Queen and her 6 followers laying waste to colonies of authoritarian alien races reach her and the rest of their fragmented hero team. By the time the final act of the story approaches, the Snow Queen, a shell of Seraphina, returns to Earth to put an end to the rampant corruption brought about by Max Astral. She comes just in time to witness his assassination, and with him gone, Clara changes her plans, deciding to take Earth so that it may belong to the people Max hurt instead of his supporters. Her efforts to claim the planet start in New York and begin to spread, with solo members of Azabeth's team of heroes trying every once in a while to push her back to mixed results. Finally, in the last few episodes of the series, Azabeth goes against Clara herself, a one-on-one battle as the others take on her followers. Azabeth's efforts are in an attempt to hold Clara off until the arrival of Tesla, who in the time since Clara disappeared has been repaired and plans to reason with her motherly figure. Azabeth tries to tell Clara this, but in her last moments, Clara admits to not even recognizing Azabeth in her new uniform or the name Tesla, which shocks Azabeth into slipping up and allowing Clara to kill her. As she dies, Azabeth reminds her of you, the first of Max's experiments to turn to the side of good for her and caretaker, and she hugs her the same way she did almost 14 years before. Clara is brought back, she finally recognizes Azabeth, and as Tesla arrives, she mourns both of them. Clara vows to make up for her decade of killing by serving the Trinity of Death for 10 years in the Death Realm, which is, as established, probably closer to 1,000 years in the Living Realm, meaning she will never see her friends and family again. She says goodbye to Tesla, her team, and even friends like her past followers, the Demon Muse of Music, and those she wronged in her second life. 10,000 years later, she returns to the realm of the living. When she arrives, she finds Cassidy, her immortal team leader, with the gift of one final untainted day, with 12 familiar heroic faces from her past. Clara is a mother and a scholarly figure. She's the heart of the team and a strong foundation of mercy. That's why her turn to the side of evil marks the end of her old team. Without her, there's no more pulling punches. No one to remind the rest of her former team of their morality. They become a lesser version of their original cohesion once Clara's gone. Just as she becomes a darker version of herself, mistaking bitterness for justice, seeking suffering under a shroud of reparations. She and Avery have that in common, which is her connection to a major theme of generations impacting those after them in the story. The heroes that rise after Clara lack that secret sauce that allowed her team to become so incredibly beloved. They lack the compassion that characters like Superman, the real Superman, have. Characters like Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Captain America, Spider-Man. Those characters are beloved not only because they're dope as hell, but because they still have compassion for the people they protect and their enemies. And Clara, despite being a pretty lousy hero, brings more change than any other member of the team, because she knows when to show mercy, and when to be that angel of the battlefield. So yeah, that'll be it for today. Not as complex of a character, and again, not my favorite, but I had a lot of fun with her. She's very cutesy and I like it, even if she lacks the same superhero vibe as everyone else. Sorry if I sounded either amused or infuriated at points. I was just super late to Scamilton, this Christian illegal production of Hamilton, and that's just... the end really infuriated me. I'm Christian, and that's probably obvious by the fact that I sound like a little librarian lady. But the second you try to force an audience or existing product to snort your sermon or get up on a soapbox with you, nobody's gonna want to listen to you. Surprisingly, actions are louder than your pitchy soliloquies. Scamilton. Sorry, that wonderful production just left me with some thoughts. And I guess since I'm here, I'll give my seasonal shout out to theater productions. Definitely just go support them. Productions take a lot of hard work, so if you have free time and spare change, maybe consider it. But that's all I really have to say. This is V for Verbatim signing off until the next video. Take care and be excellent to each other. Bye!